the fastest and most effective way to smooth your 3D prints with the quality to match. I've got the breakdown for you and it's in today's video, so come check it out.
Do you really think that I could care if you really don't like me? I don't ever wanna see you and I never wanna miss you again. I don't ever wanna see you and I never.
What's up everyone, back at it again. It is DW Darkwing Dad. Today's tutorial is gonna go over by far the fastest, most efficient way to smooth your 3D prints and get the best quality you possibly can. Now I know I've knocked out a lot of these videos before. It kind of all started with me airbrushing the Bondo glazing putty, and then it kind of evolved into using plastic metal, and in my most recent video I use the U-Pole Fantastic Putty. But today we're going to be kicking it up a notch as we're actually using another product from U-Pole. It is their 1K combination putty. This is a little bit different from what I used in the last video, but this one by far is going to give you the fastest and best results, and I'm going to explain why. For a model, I'm using a pretty detailed piece here. Even with all the detail and everything that you see in here, we're gonna be able to get this thing completely smooth. I'm gonna go through all the steps, different variations that you can do, maybe to save you some time, but also give you even better results. So without any further ado, let's get this camera flipped around and get this party started. All right, so jumping right into the process here, guys. This was the same piece that I used in the last video. Really, the first thing that you wanna do, go ahead and clean up any edges, any overhangs with the soldering iron. Obviously, we have to sand it first. Now this particular piece, I am not going to be using a power sander. Of course, I have a power sander. I recommend if you have anything with big flat edges and things like that, a power sander is definitely going to help you knock out the piece a lot faster. For this piece here, there's just so much definition. I'm going to pretty much be doing this whole piece by hand, but what's great about the products that I'm using and the process that I'm showing you is it's still going to get done super fast with absolutely awesome results. When I start off sanding by hand, I like to start with 80 grit. If I am using a power sander, I'll usually step it up to 120. Power sanders can generate a lot of heat, so if you're using something like PLA or something that has a thinner infill, it can start to warp and kind of chew up and eat away at the model. The beauty of it doing by hand is you don't really generate a lot of heat. Yes, it is more physical labor. However, it's a lot more controlled. You're able to take your time around some of these tight edges here. I like things to look as crisp and as clean and as sharp as they possibly can. You're going to save time with the power sander, but again, there are going to be things that you're going to ultimately compromise. A lot of times it is definition and crispness of the model. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to get this knocked down with some 80 grit. All right, so once we are done with our scuff sand, probably about 7 minutes, and the goal is not to get these areas here completely flat because the putty that we're using is going to fill all these in and sand down. You don't want to sand down too much to where we start to lose form or round things off. We've got our acetone and we have our U-Pole 1K combination putty. Now this is a little bit different than the U-Pole Fantastic, which you can see I used the whole tube, but this is an acrylic based putty, so it does dry a little bit faster. It is a little bit harder, but it's not too hard to where it compromises how fast you can get it knocked down. The additives are very similar, so I do recommend wearing some sort of breathing mask, whether it be a respirator or whatever you have. You want to make sure you're taking the proper PPE and just put a decent amount in here. It's about a 2-to-1 ratio. So 2 parts putty, 1 part acetone. I'm gonna get this stirred up and show you how to put this on. All right, so real quick here, just showing you the consistency of this 2-to-1 mix. Very similar to house paint. You want it thick, but not too thick. When I apply this, I like to have a decent amount on my brush. It can be a little bit thicker. It's okay, you're gonna spread it out, but what I like to do is apply it going from left to right and trying to make sure you cover the underlying color of the filament. The red did work very well in this situation, but again, going from left to right, trying to cover a good amount, and then when you do your second coat, go in a different direction, top to bottom. That way it's going to eliminate the amount of brush strokes as you go over it and kind of go in a cross-hatching motion. It's going to blend it in. Again, that acetone is going to reactivate and then spread that putty out nice and smoothly. This is an acrylic putty, so it dries very quick. So that is one thing when you apply this, you are going to be, know, doing it in smaller sections, dipping your brush in, going back and forth. But again, I'll repeat myself, because we're using acetone, it is constantly going to be reactivating it and spreading it out. So you really won't get a lot of high spots and things like that. It can still happen, but the acetone mix just allows it to spread so quick. If you start to pull the putty like I did right there, you want to dip it back in. That means it's drying out, and what you're doing is kind of breaking down the putty. You don't want that. You want it nice and smooth. You want to blend it in. This being an acrylic based putty, it is going to harden and create almost kind of like a shell, but it still sands really easy, something usually around 180 or 220. Of course, I'm going to go through, do this to the entire model here. One thing that's great about this method, especially in detailed parts, and I've mentioned this in some of my other videos, a lot of people like using UV resin, but I don't really like doing that because I feel like you're fighting gravity. It doesn't really dry quick enough. Something like this here, if we were to load this into this crevice, we could very easily spread it out. So let me give you an example here. I'm going to really load this on this area to where it's filling in a lot of those defined parts here. So I put a good amount on. You can see how it's filling it in. We're losing definition. If you did that with Bondo body filler or something like that, that hardens, you're going to be sanding that all day. With this, just take a little bit of straight acetone, put it on the brush, and then very simply work that acetone in, and then you can spread that throughout your whole model. You put it on, load it on too heavy in one area, you can just add a little bit of acetone, thin it back down, and then go about your model. Take a little bit more time, get those pieces looking awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and cover this model with the putty here and then show you guys the next step. The great thing about this method is it is applicable to both of the U-pull putties. The 1K, it's going to be a little bit harder. It dries a little bit faster. I feel it does give a little bit more durability to the model, but they both sand really easy. I'm just a little bit more partial to the 1K. Dries a little bit faster, just gets a little bit more harder. I think it fills just a tad bit better, but you really can't go wrong with either one of these putties. These are going to be substantially better than using Bondo glazing putty. Both of these are different in their own sense. One is going to be resin based, the other one is going to be acrylic based. Minimal to no shrink rates. With the Bondo glazing putty, that has talc powder in it, so it's going to shrink a lot more. You're going to get that cracking. I've showed that in other videos. You can actually see here on some areas of this model where I did apply it heavier, there's no cracking, there's no splitting because there's no shrinking. If I did that with the Bondo glazing putty, there would be cracking, there would be separation, and you basically have to sand that off and do it all over. So the Bondo glazing putty does still serve a role, but as far as filling goes, these two products here are going to be absolutely fantastic. You can see here we've been able to keep all of the definition of the model. It dries super quick and it'll be ready to sand in no time. With all that said, let me give you some tips here before we get sanding. So once your model is dry, realistically after about 10 minutes, this is completely dry to the touch. Sanding tool here, and I'm actually going to be using 180. You can use 180 or 220. Like right here, it's definitely got some deeper blemishes that we're going to have to try to get this putty as level as possible to fill this in. I'm going to do this all by hand. Again, if you have a power sander, depending on your model, go ahead and hit that with the power sander, but I'm going to hit this with 180 and see how it looks. I did a combination of 180 and 220. This is really where you're going to spend the most amount of time sanding all of those dips and PLA lines. It really did knock out a ton of the PLA lines. Now, I do have some bad weather rolling in. I'm going to try to get some filler primer on this. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get it all done today. I was really hoping to time lapse this whole thing in, you know, an hour to an hour and a half. Piece like this is really hard because of all these little areas. You know, I was basically just folding sandpaper and going through here. Detailed pieces like this are always going to take long, trying to get every nook, every cranny as mint as possible. But there's a big difference between doing it fast and doing it efficient. When we do it efficient, we're keeping all of the definition, all of the eccentric properties, all the aesthetics intact. Like I said, anybody can take a palm sander, whip over something, get rid of a majority of the PLA lines, but when you take time to keep the definition, it's really gonna separate, you know, a good print from a great print. We're gonna get some filler primer on it, see what areas need a little bit more touch-up work, and then we're gonna move on to the next process.
I'm better left alone than in this. It doesn't surprise me.
As predicted, the weather has halted my progress. This piece already is starting to look really good. We do have some deeper defects and we're going to take care of those. You know, all we did with this piece was hand sand with 80 grit, 2 coats of the U-pull 1K putty, and then we sanded it with a combination of 180 and 220, 2 coats of the Bondo filler primer. Next step here is going through and sanding this with a lighter grit sandpaper to see what the filler primer is going to take care of. You've got all these areas in here that just filler primer is not going to take care of. Could you sit there and sand it, do filler primer, sand it, do filler primer, you know, do that 4 or 5 times over? It's just going to take way too long. The method that I do, and a lot of the times I'll do this before I even sand this filler primer, is I'll go ahead and just use Bondo glazing putty, and it works really well. Don't get me wrong, the Bondo glazing putty is great. I think it's awesome for touch-up. So for little things like this, if you don't want to use the U-pull, you don't have to, but pretty much going to dilute this down 1-to-1, and then I'm going to paint this on, and it's going to fill those right in. I'm going to sand them with 320 and 400, do another coat of filler primer. This thing's going to look brand new. There's no denying, you know, that this method already is working. So first step here is just sanding this with 320. What's too deep, what does get taken away, and then we'll get into the next step. Recycled 320 and hand sand all this. If you've never used Bondo filler primer, ready to sand in about 15 minutes. This whole process, everything I'm using, the U-pull with the acetone, have like solvents in them. Those solvents evaporate so fast and it's ready to sand substantially quicker than Duplicolor, Rust-Oleum, anything else. The Bondo filler primer is lacquer. That's one thing that saves you so much time is, you know, you use something like Rust-Oleum, you got to wait 2-3 hours before you can sand the filler primer. This stuff, does it cost a little bit more? Yes, it does. However, it's going to fill way better and it's going to be able to get sanded a lot quicker. Time is money, especially if you're doing commissions. Now, I do recommend using some sort of foam interface. When I get to my final sand, really focus on sanding it a little bit more gentler, and sometimes introduce a little bit of too much force and you can gouge it. But when you're using something like 320, it's less likely to happen. So for right now, because this is really just the first sand that we're doing, not quite necessarily needed. Again, just kind of giving you guys some tips. There's no reason to do a step, you know, 2 or 3 times if you can knock it out in the first try. It's going to clean a ton of this up. That sounds awesome. We're gonna take this, reduce it down, paint it in the deeper areas, sand that down. We'll do a black base, see how this piece looks here at the end. Basically use 320, and then at the end there, 400 grit, foam interface. Reduce some of the gouges or anything I might have put in some of the corners. Super smooth, but we can definitely see that we do have some defects that we're gonna have to go through and touch up. You know, when it's sanded like here, it hides a lot because you've got different tone variances. We really don't know the full integrity of it. So what we have to do here is we're gonna put a coat of the Bondo filler primer on. That's gonna help fill in some of these scratch marks and some of the other defects, but also help identify where we're gonna need to place this putty. It is perfectly okay to put this putty with the acetone in it, etch it and reactivate it and blend it and form it together as one. You're not going to have lifting or anything like that. And brush some of the U-pull putty on there. Start getting these last defects out. Get the last coat of filler primer on. See how this bad boy looks. So now checking out the arm piece here after the 320 and 400 sand. Bondo is a crucial step in this process. It fills in a lot, but you can still see here we do have some low areas that the putty is really going to help speed up. So really what I like to do at this point is wipe the piece down and go ahead and just anywhere where there's a dip or something that I don't think is going to get filled in, I will go ahead and just do a 1-to-1 ratio with the putty. Apply that over there with the brush. Once that is completely dry in about 10 minutes, go ahead and sand that again with 320 and 400. Then you can either add a dark filler primer or, as I did right here, just a matte black primer just to show all the defects. You can see here we've got a pretty good looking piece. It's not perfect. There are still some areas that are going to need some sanding, something probably in the means of 400 or 600. This piece got done in a very timely manner. It took me somewhere around an hour and 20 minutes. You may be able to skip a few steps there and get it knocked down in an hour. I did the same process with the War Machine hands. I'm starting to work on those. After we put that black base coat on, it does bring out all the defects, so that's why I highly recommend doing that. There's a couple areas here and there where I got to go through with the putty and get it knocked all down, but overall for spending about 50-60 minutes on this hand, I'd say it's about 90% finished, and I just have some small touch-ups to do. Now that you guys have seen my process, let me recap some stuff and wrap this video up for you and give you my final thoughts. Well, there you have it. Another awesome technique that I am bringing you. Best, most effective, and fastest way by far that I've done to smooth your 3D prints. I mentioned a lot of great things in this video. This product here, this U-pull 1K putty, it so far really has been the best, fills the best, it dries the fastest. That's really the biggest thing that you can take away from this whole video is the amount of filling that you do, how quick it dries, and then using that Bondo filler primer. You're not wasting hours on end, you know, for things to dry. You know, taking the model and trying to sit there and sanding it down with 60 grit and 80 grit and trying to get rid of every single PLA line and just coating layer after layer after layer of filler primer, you're not going to get as good of a quality as you are of utilizing something like a great putty like this. It's just an awesome method that is not only going to save you a ton of frustration, have a much faster turnaround time for your project, just an absolutely great process. Done fast, efficient, and gives you absolutely killer results. You know, I've even started messing around with this method and just painting it on, not even sanding the model first, and I'm already getting absolutely awesome results. So this method works. Go ahead and get it. It's really an awesome product. The filling ability that this 1K gives you, it's just so awesome. Definitely a process for you makers out there who are trying to save time, maybe cut down on sanding. The U-Pull 1K putty with the acetone. The Bondo filler primer, definitely going to give you the quickest turnaround time. Duplicolor is pretty good. It's not going to be quite as fast, but still a pretty awesome product. Knock out those projects and let me know how you did. If you liked the video and found it useful, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. If any questions, anything, go ahead and drop me a comment. Of course, if you're a first-time watcher of the channel, you do enjoy all things 3D printing, cosplay, Funko Pops, Marvel, all the cool stuff that we're doing, go ahead and click that subscribe button. I've got much more on the way. I'm going to be doing silk printing part 3. I've got my review of the longer LK4X, the Kang helmet, of course, updates on the Punisher War Machine suit. So if you like any of that, make sure to click that subscribe button, come back and see me. That's it for now, guys. I got to keep chipping away the list of things that I got to do so I can bring you guys more content and more video. So until next time, it's DW out. Later.